A noble looms over a battered and bruised commoner, generously granting him one final display of magic. With a trembling finger, the commoner summons a small fireball. Yet, as it approaches the noble, it swiftly fizzles out. The noble declares that 3 elements are crucial for a magician: lineage, talent, and effort. Consequently, no matter how hard one works, lacking the right family background or innate talent, much like the commoner, will forever hinder the mastery of magic. The noble proceeds to summon an enormous, blazing fireball that consumes the commoner entirely. Even as he screams, the commoner revels in the overwhelming might and brilliance of noble magic. As his dying wish, he laments the missed opportunity to wield magic with mastery. Granted his wish, the commoner opens his eyes to the sight of 3 maids enthusiastically attending to him. Confused, he tries to shoo the unfamiliar faces away with a fireball, only to be surprised by the tiny size of his hand. He has been reincarnated as Prince Lloyd, the 7th heir to the Saloon Kingdom. A decade later, Lloyd rushes past 2 nobles. Despite their attempts to detain him for a hunting lesson, he pays them no heed. One of the nobles dismisses Lloyd, considering him too young to be a legitimate heir among his siblings, thus unworthy of royal treatment. In contrast, the other noble points out how from an early age, Lloyd demonstrated a keen understanding of their language and read into spellbooks instead of picture books. He believes that Lloyd might be the reincarnation of William Bolt, the father of magic. Eavesdropping on their discussion, Lloyd reflects how in his previous life, he was not William Bolt but rather an ordinary citizen. Despite the mysteries surrounding his reincarnation, his sole focus remains the same: acquiring knowledge and mastering spells. Avoiding the maids and servants, Lloyd sneaks into the library. While perusing the vast collection, he selects a book, only to have it swiftly snatched from his grasp by Silpha, his sword instructor. Much to his displeasure, Silpha leads him to the training grounds. Given his lack of athleticism and the fact that he won't be regarded as an heir, Lloyd questions the necessity of sword practice. Nevertheless, Silpha insists. The 2 charge at each other as they begin to spar, skillfully dodging and parrying attacks. Silpha commends Lloyd's progressing skills, oblivious to the fact that he has been cheating. Using control magic on himself, Lloyd replicates Silpha's movements, essentially creating a mirrored version of her in the fight. As they continue to spar, Lloyd realizes that despite mimicking Silpha's movements precisely, differences in strength, reach, and height persist. Pushed back by Silpha, Lloyd decides to conduct an experiment to address these differences. Using magic, he strengthens his body and extends his sword. Floating slightly above the ground, he charges at Silpha, and the 2 clash again. With these adjustments, the error has been corrected, and now Silpha is essentially fighting a perfect mirror image of herself. Lloyd shifts his strategy, removing the trace on Silpha's movements to launch an unexpected charge from a blind spot. However, Silpha blocks the attack. She has realized that Lloyd used magic for an advantage. Caught, Lloyd begins to retreat, and Silpha disarms him. She assumes he only used magic to elongate his sword and compensate for his height. She finds this charming and hugs him close, impressed he managed to activate 2 types of magic simultaneously. Lloyd refrains from revealing that he had actually employed 4 types of magic. Later that day, the maids insist that Lloyd join them for a bath. Resistant to the idea, Lloyd attempts to evade them, but they are determined not to let him escape. In an effort to dissuade him, they recount the tale of the Magian from the Forbidden Book. It once threatened to obliterate Saloum, and it was only through the sacrifices of numerous mages that the Magian was eventually contained within a book called the Grimoire, concealed in the Forbidden Books section beneath the castle. When Lloyd falls silent, the maids assume he is frightened by the Magian. As they bicker over who gets to sleep with Lloyd that night, he slips away, excited at the prospect of delving into a forbidden book. 2 knights stand guard at the entrance to the forbidden section. Lloyd effortlessly bypasses them with the use of wind magic. The guards, however, maintain their confidence, asserting that even if someone were to breach their defenses, the entrance to the library below is secured by the ultimate seal crafted through the combined powers of 10 mages. Unperturbed, Lloyd effortlessly dismantles the seal and gains access to the hidden underground library. Filled with excitement, he flits from shelf to shelf, eager to explore each tome before reapplying the seal. While Lloyd's engrossed in a book, a dark shadow slithers out from another tome, taking the form of a dragon-like creature. It identifies itself as the grimoire and proposes a deal to Lloyd, breaking its seal in exchange for a reward of gold. It is sure that the seal would eventually break either way, as it is already deteriorating. Unwilling to unleash a magen which could threaten the country that serves as his magical research base, Lloyd resolves to reinforce the seal himself. The grimoire, taken aback, decides to entice Lloyd by offering to teach him ancient magic. To its surprise, Lloyd's eyes light up at that prospect. Assuring the grimoire of unique magical talent, Lloyd raises his hand and effortlessly shatters the grimoire's seal. The grimoire emerges, assuming the shape of a creature half goat, half wolf. Instead of honoring its promise, it responds maliciously by unleashing the black laser cannon upon him. Convinced that it's the end for him, the grimoire starts to move away. However, as the smoke clears, Lloyd stands unharmed, protected by a unique form of magic that baffles the grimoire. Lloyd casts a sly glance at the creature and requests to be taught more magic. The grimoire fires another black cannon at Lloyd, but his barrier remains intact. Lloyd expresses a desire to experience the magic firsthand. Thus, he opens a corner of his barrier, allowing a bit of the grimoire's next attack to penetrate. The grimoire watches in surprise as Lloyd twirls the black magic around his finger, looking delighted and barely bothered by the pain. With a cheeky smile, he requests another attack from the grimoire. Enraged, the grimoire splits its face into two and roars out a double incantation. A black whirlwind of magic, known as the spiral black laser cannon, hurtles towards Lloyd. Despite the intensity of the attack, Lloyd's barrier holds. He realizes the unique devil magic requires the simultaneous use of two mouths to weave two spells into one, hence, impossible for him to replicate. Once the grimoire's magic dissipates around Lloyd's powerful barrier, the grimoire attempts to flee, but Lloyd has cast another barrier, preventing its escape. Having learned from a past incident where he lost control and caused destruction, Lloyd now habitually employs barriers whenever he engages in magical combat. His expression manic, Lloyd conjures an ardent flame fireball and hurls it at the grimoire, eager to witness its defensive magic. The grimoire is tossed around within the magical barrier by the force of the attack, causing the entire library to upheave. As it crashes to the floor, defeated, Lloyd crouches near it, curiously inquiring why it didn't defend against his attack. Lloyd employs magic to restore order to the room. Impressed, the grimoire kneels before Lloyd and offers to be his familiar. Lloyd readily agrees and asks the grimoire to adopt a more inconspicuous appearance to avoid drawing attention. Obediently, the grimoire transforms into a small rabbit with horns, while secretly plotting to betray Lloyd when he least expects it. Lloyd beckons the grimoire closer, and, underestimating him, the grimoire complies. However, upon approaching, it senses a dense and almost otherworldly magical aura emanating from Lloyd. Frightened, the grimoire trembles and opts to remain obedient for the time being. Lloyd's older brother, Alberto, discovers him in the library. Lloyd shares with the grimoire that Alberto is reputedly adept with both the pen and the sword, with rumors suggesting he might become the next king. Alberto drags Lloyd to the magic shooting range. Spectators gather to witness Prince Alberto skillfully shoot a fireball precisely at the farthest target, earning admiration for his exceptional talent. Lloyd tells the grimoire that opportunities to practice magic are limited within the castle. Therefore, he accepts all of Alberto's invitations to use the various castle facilities reserved for the successor. However, Lloyd is cautious about drawing attention to himself to avoid affecting his brother's status. Consequently, he opts to shoot a curving fireball that only grazes the target. Lloyd's fireball spins and grazes each successive target. Onlookers assume that the trajectory is unstable, unaware that Lloyd deliberately hit each target. After the session concludes, Alberto departs for a break. Excited to have the practice field to himself, Lloyd is eager to attempt the double incantation he witnessed from the grimoire. The grimoire insists that it is impossible, but with a mischievous glint in his eyes, Lloyd taps the top of the grimoire's head. The creature dissolves into Lloyd's hand, transforming into a face in his palm. The grimoire is shocked at Lloyd's audacity, but it is simultaneously aware that it can't take over the boy's body thanks to his dense magical power. Lloyd is excited about having two mouths for the double incantation and instructs the grimoire to cast an ardent fireball with him. However, as he starts his incantation, the grimoire is struck dumb when all Lloyd casts is a spell so small he finishes it in one breath. Startled by the grimoire's frightened reaction, Lloyd explains that he cast an incantation scroll. It is a method of shortening the required chants. Lloyd used it to compress 100 spells into a single chant and recite it in one breath. The grimoire is dumbfounded, admitting that the most it can manage is 2 to 3 spells, not 100. Undeterred, Lloyd decides to transfer his consciousness into his hand so he can use both his own mouth and grimoires. Taking a deep breath, Lloyd casts 2 separate types of spells with the 2 mouths, shocking the grimoire further. He effortlessly weaves them together, and the magic that swells is extraordinary, multiplied by 10. Waving his hands in intricate motions, Lloyd directs the huge spell at the targets in an explosive rush of magic. Meanwhile, the castle nobles express curiosity about Alberto's fascination with Lloyd. Alberto clarifies that Lloyd directed the trajectory of his shot and deliberately hit every target, even the farthest one. Alberto declares Lloyd a genius and confidently predicts that he will eventually become a great sage. He then turns to the practice field, wondering whether Lloyd has managed to pierce all the targets by this point. Alberto is surprised and delighted to see that Lloyd has successfully knocked over all the targets. The nobles are left in shock as Alberto joyfully congratulates his brother and takes his leave. Once they leave, the grimoire on Lloyd's hand gazes at the sky in terror, where Lloyd has torn apart the entire stratosphere with the force of his magic. Lloyd quickly raises his hand and mends the tear, panting and sweating from the exertion. The grimoire, in dumbfounded awe, struggles to comprehend the extent of Lloyd's extraordinary abilities. After exhausting every book in the library, Lloyd turns to reading a newspaper. The news highlights the conquest of an A-class dungeon by an adventurer party, reaping abundant riches and magic-infused items. Intrigued, Lloyd expresses a desire to explore a dungeon himself. The grimoire attempts to convey that the 7th prince cannot venture out alone, no matter how pent up he is. However, Lloyd argues that he compensates with magic tricks. Lloyd takes out an acorn and performs a nature spell, transforming it into a wooden puppet that is an exact replica of Lloyd. He explains how he simulated bark to create bones, flesh, and skin, and replicated blood and nervous systems. With this lifelike puppet standing in for him, Grimoire believes Lloyd can safely explore the outside world. However, Lloyd remains wary of Silpha. After dividing Grimoire's spirit between his hand and the wooden doll, Lloyd successfully escapes the castle undetected by Silpha. As he soars into the open, Grimoire assumes Lloyd's place within the castle. With Lloyd temporarily out of the picture, Grimoire contemplates the newfound freedom to act as it pleases. However, Lloyd unexpectedly communicates through his hand and expresses gratitude for Grimoire's presence. Touched by Lloyd's words, Grimoire swiftly abandons any malicious intent. As Lloyd hovers above the forest, he realizes that he lacks information on the location of a dungeon. His thoughts are interrupted when he notices 3 massive orcs chasing a girl in a clearing below. Contrary to expectations, the girl delivers a powerful punch that sends one of them flying. Subsequently, she dispatches the remaining 2 with well-executed kicks, bringing them down to the ground. To finish them off, she unleashes a powerful wind attack that obliterates the orcs completely. Lloyd is exhilarated to witness a real-life martial artist and is impressed by her mastery of harnessing extraordinary power through a technique called Ki. The girl is introduced as Tao, a B-rank adventurer and martial artist. When Tao spots him lurking in the distance, Lloyd consults Grimoire about revealing himself to inquire about dungeons. Grimoire warns him that if he exposes his true identity, the person might recognize him as the 7th prince. With no response from Lloyd, Tao assumes he's an enemy and approaches his hiding spot. Just in time, Lloyd uses the double incantation technique and casts 2 illusion spells to merge his face with that of Prince Alberto's body, creating an unrecognizable form. Lloyd presents himself to Tao under the alias Roberto, posing as an adventurer. The girl is elated upon encountering a handsome adventurer. Having fled her dojo, she had to navigate the dungeon solo due to others being intimidated by her formidable power. When Lloyd proposes joining her on a dungeon expedition, she enthusiastically agrees. Tao guides them to an unnamed B-rank dungeon. She effortlessly defeats the encountered monsters and turns to Lloyd, expecting praise. However, he seems more engrossed in the pebbles beneath his feet. However, Lloyd reassures her that he was watching and commends her skills. As they settle down for a meal, Lloyd expresses curiosity about the Ki Tao employed in her attacks. Tao is taken aback by his knowledge, as very few people on the continent are familiar with it. Lloyd reveals his understanding that Qi is like magic power in sorcery, and breathing techniques are an important part of it. Tao is further amazed and proceeds to elaborate on Qi training, emphasizing that it revolves around mastering the art of breathing. It involves directing Qi throughout the body using breath, ultimately unleashing a mysterious power. She notes that considerable training is required just to sense the presence of Qi within oneself. Despite this, Lloyd attempts to execute the technique immediately. The Qi flows into his lungs and causes a sharp pain that compels him to abandon the attempt. Tao emphasizes that using Qi prematurely will make his lungs feel like they're engulfed in flames. Lloyd, on the other hand, is thrilled about the opportunity to learn the Qi technique. The prospect of harnessing this power and combining it with magic excites him. When Tao extends an offer to instruct him further on Qi, Lloyd eagerly accepts. Meanwhile, Grimoire, inhabiting Lloyd's duplicate, reflects on Lloyd's actions. He finds it amusing that despite Lloyd's incredible strength and seemingly carefree lifestyle, his sole focus lies in exploring magic. Lost in thought, he startles when Silpha approaches from behind. On the flip side, Tao launches a Qi bullet at the dungeon's boss monster, the Grey Wolf, effortlessly overpowering it. The defeated creature unveils a treasure chest before them. Tao is confident that such an immature treasure chest can only yield favorable rewards. Lloyd is increasingly fascinated with not just the immature treasure chest, but the dungeon itself and the monster that one has to defeat to access rewards. Witnessing his enthusiasm, Tao realizes she has at last discovered a worthy partner. She is certain that even her father would recognize their betrothal. Lloyd interrupts her thoughts, signaling that it's time to open the treasure chest. Anticipating nothing extraordinary, Tao approaches and pushes the lid open. To their astonishment, the ground beneath them cracks open, and a dark shadow emerges from the chest. The shadow transforms into a skeleton draped in a dark cloak, a form that Tao identifies as a lich. Tao clenches her fist, and when Lloyd asks, reassures him that it's not overly powerful, so he should wait outside. Despite Lloyd's desire to observe, Tao forcefully pushes him out of the dungeon. Tao expects her blow to send Lloyd flying out and earn him a few broken bones, but regardless, she knows it's better than dying. Tao confronts the lich and evades its attacks. Tao panics as she dodges the lich's attacks, wondering why such a powerful monster is present in a low-level dungeon. Even A-class adventurers struggle against a lich. She plans to delay the creature until Lloyd is safely outside. As Lloyd flies out of the dungeon, he envelopes himself in a protective barrier, calmly contemplating his next move. The monsters attempting to intercept him are crushed beneath his protective shield. Curious about why he was sent flying away, Lloyd asks Grimoire. He is surprised as Grimoire responds with a feeble voice, pleading for him to return and rescue him. In the midst of her struggle against the monster, Tao fears an impending defeat and contemplates the need to retreat. Suddenly, the lich speaks and disparages her Qi technique, dismissing it as an inferior alternative to magic. It declares her unworthy of being consumed, especially when compared to the countless souls of adventurers it has devoured. The lich acknowledges the competence of the boy she was with, asserting that he is far more skilled. As Tao charges at him, the lich casts a barrier around itself. Undeterred, she persistently assaults the barrier, repeatedly striking until she creates a crack. Eventually, she shatters the barrier with a powerful Qi bullet. The triumph, however, takes a toll on Tao as she collapses into an exhausted state, gasping for breath. The excessive use of her Qi leaves her incapacitated, unable to move a muscle. The lich, now standing behind her, commends her for breaking through its barrier. Yet, it remains confident that the magic in even a single one of its fingers surpasses her abilities. The lich raises a hand, unleashing an explosive spell known as the Death Fong directly at Tao. Fortunately, Lloyd reappears just in the nick of time and erects a protective barrier around both Tao and himself. He urges her to allow him to handle the lich so he can return home. Lloyd shoots a fierce glare at the monster, eager to bring it down. Tao is taken aback to see Lloyd and the protective barrier he has summoned. The lich initiates a complex spell, only to be interrupted by Lloyd casting an incantation scroll. Lloyd breaks free from his barrier and dashes towards the lich using wind magic, leaving both the monster and Tao shocked. As Lloyd envelopes himself in another barrier, the lich launches a barrage of magic attacks, all of which fail to break through. Lloyd attempts to merge ki and magic, but the combination proves challenging. He senses he's on the brink of success, he just needs that extra something. Recalling Tao's advice to concentrate, Lloyd takes a deep breath and races through the cave. In order to allow more air into his lungs, he dissolves his protective barrier. The Lich believe it's been shattered and sends an onslaught of magical attacks that Lloyd swiftly dodges. His eyes closed, Lloyd intertwines his magic and ki and feels the strain on his lungs. He conjures a swirling ball of combined magic and ki, slashing it towards the enemy. When it falls short of reaching the Lich, he adjusts and sends a rapid succession of attacks, reveling in the exhilarating battle. The Lich, baffled by the speed of the onslaught, is pushed back by its formidable force. Tao watches as Lloyd further adjusts his merged attack, refining its sharpness and thinning it out. The Lich, in response, conjures a magical barrier, but Lloyd's adapted assault effortlessly shatters both the barrier and the Lich, cleanly splitting them in two. The two of them then approach the open chest, and Lloyd retrieves a shabby, worn-looking dagger. Despite being imbued with magic, Tao senses that the enchantments are rather ordinary. Abruptly, the treasure chest begins sinking into the ground. Tao explains that this is the consequence of claiming the treasure, after which the dungeon disappears. Lloyd realizes that the treasure chest serves as the genuine core of the dungeon. Nestled in the ground, it absorbs magic items to expand into a dungeon. As the dungeon nears conquest, the treasure chest gives up all the accumulated items and escapes. Tao interjects, urging Lloyd to focus on the collapsing surroundings. On their way out, Tao asks Lloyd about his choice of using ki instead of magic. She assumes it was to spare her from mockery, but Lloyd reveals it was solely because he found it intriguing. As Lloyd picks up the dagger they discovered in the cave and prepares to depart, Tao promises to train diligently in order to become a woman as capable as Roberto. Lloyd wishes her the best and takes off. Lloyd hurries home and slips in through the window. He discovers Grimoire lying on the ground with a swollen head. Grimoire recounts how Silpha, noticing his sudden weakness, trained him relentlessly and without mercy. He sobs into a pillow as Lloyd tries to offer comfort. In Lloyd's room at the Saloon Castle, Grimoire sulks upon discovering that Lloyd was late so that he could fetch a worn knife. Lloyd attempts to persuade him that it's a genuine treasure. He immerses the knife in hot water and scrubs its surface to remove the magic marrow coating. This magical marrow serves as the conduit for applying enchantments, allowing one to enhance weapons. In essence, with the help of the knife, Lloyd can have the opportunity to learn about enchantment magic. Nevertheless, magic marrow liquid is expensive and the enchantment process is intricate. If unsuccessful, both the liquid and the weapon are lost. This prompts Lloyd to opt for a different approach, analyzing the marrow and manufacturing it himself on a larger scale. Employing purifying water magic, he refines a portion of muddy water. Lloyd is confident that by continually enhancing the purity, he can break down the substances into their fundamental components. As anticipated, he quickly discovers that the primary ingredients include silver, oil, and red magic flour, derived from the powdered core of a monster. Lloyd reveals that he brought back the dungeon's treasure chest and suggests it can be used to produce the flour. All they need now are oil, silver, and an abundance of weapons. Lloyd approaches his father for silver coins, and his father gladly hands him a bag, which he promptly adds to the concoction. During sword training, Silpha skillfully evades Lloyd's attacks. When he attempts a strike from below, Silpha conjures stone blocks from the ground that are filled with natural oil. Catching him off guard, she manages to knock him away and into her arms. Despite their agreement for Lloyd to defeat Silpha in exchange for the oil, she hands him a container filled with it. Grimoire, observing from the sidelines, wonders how strong the maid has to be for Lloyd to be unable to best her. Lloyd scampers away with the oil, while Silpha admires his impressive skills at such a young age. Having secured all three essential ingredients, Lloyd successfully prepares the magic marrow liquid. He then approaches his brother Alberto for the necessary weapons. Prince Alberto, finding Lloyd's request endearing, directs his knights to provide the weapons Lloyd needs. As they comply, internally, they grumble about the potential waste of their newly acquired weapons, confident that the enchantments Lloyd is attempting will likely be unsuccessful. Lloyd is now equipped with 120 weapons, ready for enchantments. With a mass-produced magic liquid and a wooden doll replica of himself serving as a helper, both Grimoire and Lloyd are brimming with excitement. Grimoire observes as Lloyd enthusiastically writes various enchantments in the limited spaces available on each weapon until the steel breaks under his fingers. Encouraged by Grimoire's cheers, Lloyd goes through a trial-and-error process, determined to craft the perfect weapons. Once he's done, he presents Alberto with the 50 out of the 120 successfully modified weapons, apologizing for ruining the remaining 70. Alberto is astonished to find that Lloyd has accomplished what even high-level enchanters achieve with only a 10% success rate. The guards skeptically view it as a possible hoax, assuming Lloyd got scared after botching 70 of the swords. Yet, when one guard attempts to sheath his sword, the scabbard is effortlessly sliced in half. Lloyd now wishes to see his enchanted weapons being used in an actual battle. When Alberto agrees, Lloyd asks him to accompany him on a hunt for magical beasts.